I would like to focus for a moment on this question of whether or not AI can be a good therapist. Because it's an interesting question, and it also jogs a funny anecdote that I think I got out of Daniel Dennett's one of Daniel Dennett's books, a late
A
philosopher.
therapeutic stance? Anyway.
The yeah, the therapeutic stance. No, it was the intentional stance.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
it
what I
was
was
actually
re
about the intentional
yeah,
stance.
that's what I was joking. I was
Yeah, I
yes.
got it. Um, in the early days of AI, some researcher created a very, very rudimentary program that mimicked a therapist.
Oh, yeah,
It
Eliza.
would a lot yeah, and I think but the story is it would ask some very basic canned questions. It would listen, and then if it got stumped or got a prompt it didn't understand, it would just say, does this remind you of your father or something to that effect? And the developer of this program apparently left his office and his secretary was there. And when he came back, his secretary was communicating with this program and she wanted him to like leave her with it so that they could be alone and continue talking. And it does actually connect to the intentional stance because we are just programmed to attribute agency to things that might not have it. And so you hear in literature and philosophy about therapy that a huge part of the therapeutic process is developing a relationship with your therapist. And it doesn't seem, based on the anecdotes I've just heard from you, that and my own experience, that people have trouble forming what they believe to be a relationship with an AI. And so here's what I'm wondering. I think it would be very fascinating to see studies about whether or not it was more efficacious than it would be more efficacious to deal with a therapy trained AI, for instance, at all hours of the day, whenever you need it, versus seeing a therapist 45 minutes a week. And let's just say that it does blow the therapist out of the park in terms of the average results. Now, some people, for instance, like those who are very opposed to AI art because they think it displaces human artists, would be, I'm assuming, extremely opposed to AI therapists because it's going to displace human therapists. And I'm wondering how you deal with this attitude in general that people have toward AI, that we simply should not continue producing it because even if it's better than humans at some jobs, it's displacing them and depriving them of economic opportunities.
Well, part of how we make economic progress in society is by displacing human labor. And so, for example, the Industrial Revolution displaced a whole bunch of agricultural labor, and we had a lot of improvement because of that. Now, people were by the way, during the Industrial Revolution, it was part of, again, the challenges of navigation. They, the ultimate ended up much better, but it was the transitions were difficult. It's the same thing with, like, why we have this term Luddite, from Blood and his followers, who were like, "We should not have the electric loom because everyone has great weaving careers," and it's kind of this small business and, like, well, it's like, "Nope, actually, in fact, we're much better off. We've clothed much more of the world. Clothing is much cheaper. The careers change." And that kind of progress, I think, is very important. And so I don't think stopping technological progress that has economic construction is fundamentally wise at all. And even if you succeed at doing it, like, this is one of the frequent problems you have with, kind of, call it, unions or labor forces that go, we're going to try to stop AI from being used in the classroom so the teachers, can continue to teach the way they have now, which is the same way they've been teaching for the last 50 to 100 years. By the way, there's a lot of university professors who have a very similar point of view with this, right? Just since we're in a quasi-academic discussion here. Um, and it's a disaster, and ultimately ends in a kind of decaying collapse of society, and eventually where else it's built elsewhere, that you just become a very late adopter, and your whole society, and your children and grandchildren really, really suffer from that. So I tend to think it's like, look, it isn't that you ever kind of try to hold back for, kind of for this reason. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean you're callous. Like the question is how do we navigate these challenges? Like part of the reason I describe AI in Superagency as a cognitive industrial revolution is not just because of the upside, but because, well, actually, we're going to have these transitions, and that's a very human suffering moment that we need to do, and it requires some real work for um, uh, for how to navigate this stuff. And um, one of the fortunate things with having AI is like we can help. Like for example, I was mentioning if customer service people are all transitioning, how do we have AI people, AI help someone who used to be working in a customer service job, you know, think of other kinds of work they can do, learn the other kind of work, be assisted in doing the other kind of work, finding the other kind of work. All of this stuff is kind of really important. That's how it ends up being a therapist. Now, by the way, I think a lot of humans will still choose to want human therapists too. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. But I'll finish with a small thing, which I don't think is a replacement to doctors, and I think we have infinite demand for doctors, so I'm totally good with it. But like one of the things we have a line of sight to do today is building a medical assistant on every smartphone that could run for call it under $5 an hour, which I think we should provision across as much of the world as we can. Of course, as much across, let's say, American society as we can. And the reason is, the vast majority of people do not have um, access to doctors on quick basis, and they don't know when they should or not. And if you have a medical assistant that can tell you, no, it's worth a 3-hour drive to get to the hospital, right? Then it's worth it if you say you have access to a hospital, et cetera. And so having that kind of medical assistant broadly available is super important. It will change some ways of doctors' jobs. And already today, one of the things I think that if you're not using, ChatGPT as a second opinion, or choose your preferred, highly developed model as a second opinion, uh, you're being foolish, because I think it can already help with all that stuff. And so I think that's my direction about how we lead to a much better humanist future, which is the same path that we've been on in building technology today. And actually, one last quick comment, just for people maybe read Super Agency is a lot of the ways in which we talk about AI now is the same way the educated elites talked about the printing press, right? It's like it's going to destroy human cognition. It's going to remove an ability to discern the truth. It's going to reduce the roles of these experts who have been trained for this and know how to use knowledge responsibly and so forth. And it's like, okay, right, that was clearly, anyway, it's kind of understanding, stepping out of yourself and looking back at this moment from good moments in the future and how do we get to those good moments in the future.